What's the difference between a traditional inspection and a thermal inspection?
All right, so basically the differences, say, with thermal versus visual or your traditional imagery, especially when we're talking about drones and UAVs. Pretty much the majority of drones see in visual or RGB, basically what we see in daily life. And then thermal records in heat differences. So it's not actually seeing the different colors that you may see in a thermal image. What it's seeing is in the very low end infrared spectrum, where we would see different values of heat radiating off of a surface. The benefit there is instead of just looking at physical damage like hail and wind, we can also look at penetrative damages like water penetration, leaks, insulation missing, and HVAC issues.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So why are thermal inspections becoming more popular in the roofing industry?
Well, as costs go up, a lot of people are looking at being more efficient with their money. And when you look at a visual inspection versus a thermal inspection versus the traditional needing to replace your roof on a certain yearly schedule, what you're able to do with a visual or thermal inspection is make sure that your roof is still good. And that can extend out your lifespan of a commercial roof, which gives you better ROI for that investment. On top of that, if you're looking at, say, thermal imaging and you're finding potential leaks and water intrusion, you can mitigate those damages in the local area versus having to replace an entire roof. So, as far as your cost mitigation, instead of having to have a hundreds of thousands of dollar replacement of a commercial roof, if you know exactly where to look and test for different issues, wind damage, moisture issues, XYZ, then you can be a lot more efficient with the dollars that you spend.
Yeah, I know efficiency is definitely a huge thing. Just going out there and being able to get more rapid assessments. So, like, can we talk about time? How much time does it take for these assessments to be done, or what does that process look like?
So traditionally, with thermal inspection, it would require a person on the roof with a thermal camera or FLIR camera looking at different spots and recording those temperatures as they go, and then also looking at different key locations as far as where the roof membranes meet, where they meet the edges of the roof, like the flashings, the HVACs, ventilations, all those different kind of penetrations to a roof. And the surface, you want to make sure that there's no ability for water to penetrate. So in a traditional roof inspection, that may take a couple days depending on the size of the roof, whereas with a thermal drone inspection, we can do that in an hour. And
Yeah.
then we would also have a visual inspection during the day while we have the sun up. So we're looking at maybe 2 30-minute flights to maybe 2 hour long flights.
Yeah, that's something I know you and I went back and forth on a few times as far as like the time frame of the different inspections. So why is it important to have it done at night and not during the day?
So ideally with visual, you want to have a lot of light,
Hmm.
and the sun is key to being able to see what you're looking at. With thermal imaging, the sun is a key factor, but it depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for, say, hot spots on a solar panel, you'd want that to be done during the day when there is the sun out. But if you're looking for moisture issues and things more pertinent to a commercial roof, we want to do that post sunset for a specific reason. Basically, your roofing membranes, all those materials are going to absorb the heat during the day from the sun. And then at night, they will dissipate that heat faster than, say, water penetrations and HVAC issues where it's still off gassing hot air. So basically, different thermal anomalies are a lot more visible at night for thermal roofing inspections, and it's
Yeah.
much more valuable to do it at night versus during the day.
No, it makes sense, and it's really cool because the way I try to describe to people is you have different like materials, different properties, different mediums, and so we're able to detect things because things heat up and cool off at different rates, and so that's really what we're looking for, right? It's the change, and so we have a very specific window, and when we can capture it as the heat is dissipating at different rates. So if it's too hot or it's too cold, basically too far in the evening, you're not going to get actual data. Just like if it's midsummer noon, you're not going to get good data either, unless you're looking for the solar stuff, a whole different conversation. Really interesting though.
There is a reason for doing a thermal inspection in the wee hours of the morning, especially for industrial side where they're looking for basically losing of HVAC or thermal in the early mornings, and you want to see how is your thermal insulation, uh, the outer structure of your building doing. A lot of times that's going to be best done in the early morning before sunrise, because then you'll be able to see the heat versus everything else that's already cooled down. Time of day is very, very important. Weather is very important as well. For weather, a lot like we just talked about, the sun is a huge factor. We're looking at thermal loading and how quickly different materials absorb and dissipate the heat. If it's a cloudy day, if it's a rainy day, that's going to completely affect all of the results of those thermal images, as well as if there is fog in between the drone and the roofing surface. You're going to have some basically anomalies in between the drone and the roofing surface because of the moisture in the air. So humidity makes a bit difference, time of day makes a difference. And then also like flight parameters, how you actually fly the flight, how far off the roof you are, what direction you're looking, how fast you're moving. Those are all going to affect the quality of the thermal images that we're getting, and being able to say, okay, this is definitely a hot spot for a vent versus this is a potential water intrusion where we would recommend somebody going up on the roof and doing a core sample to confirm.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so obviously, like we mentioned, we're flying these thermal images at night, right? But you're also doing a flight during the daytime. You're basically comparing the two images to try to see what it is. You want to go into further detail on that, like what that conceptually looks like?
Yeah. So, for example, say you're flying a roof at night and it's just after sunset, and you're getting a lot of an area that is nice and heated, thermally loaded, but then a whole corner of your building is a lot cooler, significantly. Okay. What would be a very important part of that scan during the day is seeing what is the surroundings around your building. Is that corner of your building covered in trees? Because if it is under shade throughout the day, you're not getting the same thermal loading as the other parts of the roof. So having that differences of seeing, okay, this is what your actual site looks like, the surroundings, and then on top of that, when we're looking at specific hotspots or differences between temperature on one area to the next area, being able to overlay the thermal image versus the visual image and confirm this is an issue or this is a typical expected thermal anomaly based off of it being a vent. Obviously, a vent is going to vent hot air, and it's going to have a thermal difference between what's next to it. But that's going to look like a circular heat difference. And then if I were able to take the thermal image and take the visual image, I would be able to say, okay, so this is a vent and it's not an issue that needs to be repaired.
Yeah.
That's a key, is not every thermal anomaly is a required repair issue. It may not even be an issue. There's a lot of times where we can use thermal imaging to verify that insulation and your exterior of the building was installed properly. So it's not even that it needs to be an issue. We're seeing things that can't be seen by the visual eye and can verify that it was built as it was supposed to. The energy efficiency of your environmental package for the enclosure is secure, and you have all of the insulation and building structure that you were expecting to begin with, on
Gotcha.
top of looking for differences over time.
So this is just to identify issues for like pre-construction. You can also do this as like a validation for a property owner to say, hey, this is what it looks like. As you can see, we don't have any issues, or we basically did due diligence. And this could be an
Yes.
offering that they can give to their end client to say, we also do this just to give you that peace and comfort that everything looks correct.
Yes. So
Yeah, makes
basically,
sense.
we can verify, hey, this roof was done properly. I've seen some spots where there was a hard part for the installers to get to. So an entire corner of roofing didn't have insulation. So then when we looked at it with the drone and the thermal imaging, the entire roof looked nice and cool and very clean. And then there was this giant hot spot with lines, and it was right with the rafters. The issues there, obviously, the builder or the people that did the installation didn't do the job correctly or fully, and they cut corners. But on top of that, that's going to cause more energy issues and potential leak issues down the road, especially in that
Yep.
area. That area actually was a hallway, like right before where the elevators were. So it was a high traffic area and a public area. So it's not like it would just be something that would be hidden. It would be something that would come up pretty quickly if there was an issue.
Okay, so yeah, so this is like a liability sort of thing as far as reducing liability on yourself and just saying, hey, I want to verify that things were done correctly and I'm not going to have issues down the road.
Good. It's also very good to have that pre-damage or pre-issue inspection as a verification to when we do a flight for the specific looking for any thermal anomalies or issues or damages as a verification back to this is what it should look like. This is what it looked like 2 years ago. This is what it looked like this year. Having those thermal inspections over time, you can see how potential damages, potential water intrusions, HVAC, insulation, all that kind of stuff is working and either be becoming compromised or it got repaired or hey, this is a growing issue we need to mitigate.
Yeah.
So that's a big thing for property managers and people that are taking care of those assets is what's the best time to take care of this issue? Should we do it right now? Can we wait a year or two? Or is this something that needs to be watched and just keep an eye on?
Yeah.
So like there's not always an immediate issue, but knowing is a lot of times 100% better and needed to know you need to know these things ahead of time to even be able to make a plan to act on them.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And that actually brings up a really good point. I know we are onboarding a client right now that is doing that exact thing. You want to go more into detail on what that looks like?
So they're taking care of properties for commercial buildings and in the realms of like small strip mall areas, stuff like that, flat roofs. A lot of these properties are existing and there are a few that have been just recently replaced as far as the roof. And we were able to go through and with the client take a look on both the visual side and on the thermal side, verify a lot of those issues that were there or were not there as far as thermal anomalies. On the visual side, we were taking looks for hail damage, splattering on HVAC, issues with siding, all those kind of things. And then on the thermal side of things, we actually had a building that had a brand new kind of curved plastic membrane roof, and then the rest of the building was still the flat TPO roof. And it was old. You could see very, very well with thermal imaging what you couldn't technically see with the visual side.
No.
It just looked like a brand new white roof. On the thermal side, you could see the rafters and all of the structural stuff underneath it. You could see where there was a little bit of pooling from water, which is okay on like we had just had some rain a little bit ago, but we were expecting that. There wasn't any issues as far as penetrations or hot spots that we were looking for. And it was a very good analysis to say, hey, they installed this roof amazingly, and there shouldn't be any issues for years to come because of the way that they installed this. The rest of the roof, there was all different kinds of penetration issues, potential water penetrations, where all of the little screws and nails were to hold fasten the TPO down. You could see hot spots around each of those. And some of the vents were working. They were nice and normal temperature. Some of the vents were not hot at all. So they either are not being used or they're blocked. And then there were one or two that were extremely hot. So you can see that there's an issue with one or two of those vents specifically and basically dial into what where those problems are.
Yeah, makes sense.
All right, so this is a very good basic diagram of different thermal things we can see in a house structure. You have your cooling, your HVAC, heating, okay? You have the sun coming down and hitting the roof. You have conduction between the roof and the interior versus the exterior. You have convection, which is the heat from the inside being able to transfer out and get to the outside of your exterior of the building through the actual material. Radiation would be the same thing, but like the actual materials getting hot and radiating heat out. And then you have your air ventilation out as far as heat exchange. Convection, radiation, basically the heat from the sun is heating up the material and heating up the attic inside, or heating up the interior of your attic, which causes convection inside. You have your ceiling, which has all of the thermal insulation, and that's that conduction factor. You want to have a very low conduction factor on that. And any radiation from your attic to the interior of your building. Okay, so that's kind of one really easy way to look at how does thermal affect the entire aspect of your building.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's a really good figure to try to explain that. But there's a lot to this, just to be very clear. This is not as simple as just putting a drone up there and being like, hey, here's some images. Like, there's actually a very specific process here. So I know I have had drone pilots reach out because being the instructor at Francis Tuttle for the drone program, I get some just random calls from people. And I've actually had quite a few, I'm going to say pilots loosely. Typically, it's someone assigned by a roofer to fly a drone and try to basically figure it out. And I've had a lot of people call me and say, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm like, well, there's a process. Like, this is not something easy, and there's a lot to it. And not only that, the other side here as well, it's not also a one size fits all. That's the other thing as well. Because what the intent or what the idea is from roofing companies is, hey, we got to do thermal. So they go buy a thermal drone. They have a guy do the flights. The guy doesn't know what he's looking for, and then they expect him to generate some magical results and be able to sell more roofs, right? And that's not how this works. And a lot of times they call me and simply like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm like, well, I mean, you don't have the proper experience, and it's part of a larger ecosystem of things you also have to do. And so you really need someone who knows what they're talking about, knows what they're looking at, to help actually make some interpretation of the data. And that's a big part. I know I'm rambling a little bit, but it's something we see all the time, and I'm glad you're showing this for us.
Yeah, no, that's a really good caveat, and also why I'm sharing this site specifically, because it comes to the training. Infrared Training Center is a really good location site to get the training, get the knowledge of, okay, here is the images as far as thermal images, but what does that mean?
Yeah.
The biggest difference, and exactly what you're getting at, is a drone pilot can go out and get thermal images. Yeah. But what is that data, and how is that data being utilized to make an effect or a benefit for a commercial roofer, a property manager, asset owner, all that kind of stuff? So this right here is basically one of their case studies of a 2002 an annual inspection with visual and thermal imaging. Back in 2002, they were just using black hot or white hot. So you have 19 degrees to 24 degrees Celsius, and you have a hot spot here, and you have two hot spots here. On the visual side, you don't see anything. And then the next year, you have your visual side down here. You still don't really see anything, but you have your hot spots that were there. And then this other spot that is also coming up as a hotter white spot wasn't there last year. Then the following year, 2004, you're not seeing anything right here on the visual side, and you're seeing that this hot spot is growing. Yeah. These other hot spots are still there, and it actually looks like the one in the back wasn't there to begin with. So you're seeing the differences over time and how this spot is growing, and then in 2006 that spot over here is growing further and is becoming even bigger of an issue. So as this is being looked at over time, we can see that there's no real visual evidence of water penetration. This is a moisture scan, specifically an example of a moisture penetration over time.
Yep.
And you can see how it's affecting right here, and it's getting more detrimental on the new one that popped up in 2006. And over time, you can see how these hot spots are spreading. And now you're starting to see a little bit more of a issue with dirt and how like the water is just pooling. But on the thermal side, this whole side that looks nice and clean, but is also really close to the building and the structure, and everywhere that there's a joint, where is this water going? If it is not being properly mitigated off of the roof, or basically your slope is back into the building, then all of these hot spots are showing how water is pooling right next to the joints in the building. So you will get more issues as far as leaks and damages under the surface that you wouldn't necessarily see in the visual side.
Yeah, makes sense. And I know on the lead gen side, a lot of roofing companies talk about how they want to get their foot in the door with different managers and property owners, et cetera, because they want to be that person that's called whenever it's time to replace, right?
Right.
And those are things that I think is tremendously valuable. And this seems like a very worthwhile investment just to go out there and do a scan. And actually, we have a client, we're pushing it right now on actually going through their existing properties and doing baseline scans so that we can show year over year changes, or even maybe finding issues that exist today that they didn't recognize, just like what you're showing there. It's an incredible tool to use along with the RGB imagery and the actual visual spectrum that we already do. And so, yeah, there's tons of potential here. And I'm really, yeah, it's clear as day on that imagery.
We're going to look at some of our actual deliverables and how some of the annotations and issues are visible, how we can compare it from one side to the other, and what some of these actually mean. So right now we're looking at a nice colorful map. This is a thermal image orthomosaic. Basically, we're taking 1900 images like this, putting them all together and providing a 2D and also 3D object for you to see your assets. What we can do is take this 3D image, okay, and we can overlay or do a side by side. So for example, we were looking at this water penetration right here, and on the visual side, we can see that basically all you're seeing is what looks like a dried up puddle and some dirt. And over here you have the same kind of dirt and dried up puddle, but on the thermal side it's not there. So basically what that is showing you is that right here in this hotter spot there's a potential for some water intrusions, water penetration, and we would suggest having a core sample to verify that. On top of that, this is the orthomosaic. It is not the most clean of all of the imagery, but we can then go in and look at any of the imagery per spot to find what are these damages, and we can annotate them for you so that you can see, okay, it is coming from the electrical and going down the seam, and there has both of these seams penetrated. On top of that, you can measure from known spots, okay, and we can provide reports as far as where every annotation, every issue that we can find is located. That way you have a very specific guideline of how and where to find any issues and target any destructive or penetrative testing to minimize any penetrations on the roof itself, and make sure that you're repairing versus replacing the entire roof.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's really just like surgical almost on just going in there and be able to find exactly where those issues are at. Obviously, drones are what we need to be using for this sort of stuff. Is there a specific type of drones or models or something you're looking for in order to actually be able to do these?
Yes, thermal cameras are different than your normal regular RGB visual cameras. Typically speaking, with a thermal camera, it's going to look like it has a mirrored coating on it. And the thermal plus visual data are going to be necessary so that those thermal drones have both your thermal camera and also your RGB visual data or camera next to it. The thermal camera, as far as the at least minimum requirements, needs to at least have a 640 by 512 resolution. Those are your newer ones like the DJI Mavic 3T, Matrice 4T that just came out. Alltel has one, and the Skydio X10. The other side of it is it would be definitely better to have RTK so that you can actually have a centimeter level accuracy for where the drone is in position comparatively to the surface of the roof.
Yeah.
And you want to be able to see a broad temperature detection range between -20 and 500 degrees on the Celsius side. Basically, we want to have a highly sensitive, less than or equal to 50 micrometers as far as your sensitivity or the thermal camera. Those would be the minimum specs. As new technology comes out, there will be better specs coming out, but this also goes into the emissivity, the humidity, and the distance to the surface that you're flying at, and stuff like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And something else to take notice of, the Mavic 3 thermal, yes, it has a thermal camera and it's a great thermal camera, but the RGB camera that goes along with it is actually not a good quality camera. And so we exclusively use Mavic 3 series of drones for our RGB, our visual spectrum modeling, just because we can have really good comparison photos to going back and forth from. But if you use your Mavic 3 thermal as a mapping drone to get the actual RGB side, it doesn't look nearly as crisp, and you're going to have a lot of lost details that are very critical on actually doing those minute inspections. So for us, for instance, we actually do two different flights. We do one during the daytime using a high quality mapping drone that's made for visual spectrum imaging, and then we also do one at night for thermal imaging. So it's actually two different flights, two different drones. Merge everything together to get the highest level detail. And if you're not doing these steps, like you're severely missing out, and you're probably missing things that you shouldn't unless you actually did it correctly. So
right, the visual cameras on the Mavic 3T, the thermal, are more for verification on the thermal side when you're doing that thermal inspection versus, say, mapping, where we use the Mavic 3E with the 4/3 inch visual sensor. And the thermal does also have a 7x zoom so that you can be a little bit further away, but then also, okay, if this is a hot spot, what is that hot spot, if you have the visual light to inspect that. But yes, as far as what we're providing for the customer, for the end product, we're using an entirely secondary visual camera just so that the visual side is the best that we can provide, on top of the thermal cameras, which is the best of what we can provide right now.
Yeah, there's other challenges as well when it comes to doing these sort of things. There's so many variables going into this, and I know you mentioned the RTK. Having RTK enabled does absolutely help with model generation and making sure that everything stitches correctly. Thermal imaging specifically is actually very hard to get enough overlap sufficiently and to generate a properly looking model. It's significantly harder to do mapping with a thermal drone than a standard camera. It's a much different. There's also other things as well with surface to takeoff altitude, as far as how far above the structure you are. You have a lot of calculations that the drones will do, but they're assuming you're on ground level. But if you're flying a structure, you actually have to do additional calculations to make sure that you're mapping at the correct height and still getting enough overlap for it. So there are so many things that go into this, and I see a lot of people really mess this up. And so you really need to have someone who knows what they're doing if you want to provide those high quality deliverables. And if you don't, if you go cheap and you just don't do it the right way, it's not going to work, and you're going to miss a lot of opportunities. So as far as the detecting of those anomalies, number one, what can it actually find? And also, how is it able to detect those different things?
So a thermal camera is working a lot differently than a normal RGB camera. It is only operating in the infrared spectrum, or lower than your visible light in the electromagnetic spectrum. It is detecting heat differences. So basically, on a surface, if you were to look at my shirt versus my shirt is actually a little bit cooler than direct skin, okay? My skin would be very warm. The chair behind me would look very dark, not because it's black, but because it's nice and cool. If I were to move and you were able to see the actual back of the chair, you'd be able to see a heat spot of where I've actually been sitting. So as far as on a roof inspection with a drone, we're taking a camera and we're taking multiple pictures over the surface of the roof and looking for differences in temperature. That is what the thermal cameras are sensing. And basically, depending on the differences in temperature, you will have a gradient between either black and white or different color palettes to show and basically target in on hotter spots versus colder spots. With commercial thermal roofing inspections, a lot of times the concerns, the annotations that we're looking for are moisture, insulation, HVAC, ventilation, and any kind of energy inefficiencies around seams and also like your windows and doors. So as far as like when we're looking at say a water penetration or a possible potential moisture issue, what is going on is on the science side of things is during the sun is out, nice sunny day, it's hitting the roof, it's heating everything up, the membrane, the vents, the structure, everything that is being hit by the sun is heating up. That is your thermal loading. Okay. And then as the sun goes down, heat source is gone, but the thermal loading is still there. Depending on each material's irradiance, basically, they will be able to expel the heat faster or slower. With, say, a TPO membrane or that kind of roofing, it's actually designed to be able to get rid of a lot of that heat quickly and be very efficient. And then you have your interior below that. With a moisture penetration, water, when we're looking at thermal during the day, will actually show up a lot cooler or darker than the rest of your roof if it's on the surface, because it is absorbing a lot of that heat and it is not radiating a lot of heat. And at night, it holds on to the thermal heat a lot longer than your hard metals, your TPO surface, and your other hard surfaces. Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, what we're going to be seeing, if there is a moisture issue or water penetration issue, is the roof is cooling down faster, and there's going to be a part or looks like a puddle, a very organic shape, okay, of, hey, this is a lot hotter area right here versus the rest of the roof. Kind of like we were showing in the annotations, the blobs of hot spots versus the rest of the roof being nice and cool indicates that we're looking at a subsurface water moisture issue, because the water and moisture is known to hold onto the heat longer, and we're not seeing any other potential explanations like a vent or a skylight or something physical that you would expect to see that hot spot there.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, essentially what we're doing is we're trying to find areas of the roof that's retaining heat longer than others, which shows that this is a different property than what should be there or the surrounding. So that's
Right.
ultimately, I mean, what we're doing here, and it's very effective. I mean, it works. If you know what you're looking for and have that side by side information, you can actually make some really good decisions on, due to the preponderance of the evidence, this is what we expect it to be. These are the specific areas that we need to go look for. Very clear as day, and it's really hard to argue against that if you're working with a building owner. Hey, there's clearly something here. We need to go up there and figure this out.
And it's not just that easy as far as like somebody taking a thermal image and being able to say, hey, there's a hot spot here, because there are going to be hot spots that are expected.
Yep.
When you have like a vent from a kitchen, especially in like a commercial kitchen, you're going to have a lot of heat coming out of those vents, and that's going to show up pretty bright on a thermal image. But if we then cross reference that to a high quality visual image to say, hey, this is a vent, and we know that this vent is right above the kitchen or wherever, that is expected. And we're not going to be providing a whole bunch of erroneous thermal anomalies that are actually supposed to be there. What we focus on, and because we have that knowledge and that training, is here are the most important and prioritized from severity down to not an issue, what we need to focus on and what has the biggest return on investment as far as your roof and your building enclosure, to make sure that you're enclosure and your roof is lasting the longest period of time that it can.
Yeah, that makes sense. So clearly, there's a lot of value here, and it's something that should be more widely adopted collectively.
Yeah.
So let's talk about how we obviously come involved in this. So Blue Falcon Aerial, really focusing on the roofing side, and what can we provide more value to that. So how do we get involved? Like, what would that process look like?
So basically, if you're a property manager, asset owner, somebody that is a larger, medium roofer, I don't want to like weed anybody out, but as far as what we focus on and specialize on, we have a nationwide pilot network that
Mhm.
can provide thermal asset inspections very, very quickly and very high quality above anything else that's on the market right now. And we're very competitive as far as the price.
Yeah,
So you will get the best like annotations and reporting that is actionable and highly valuable so that you're not going out and spending 6 to 10 times more money on boots on the roof inspections, on replacing the entire roof versus repairing the focused areas. And instead of having a blanket coat core destructive test over the entire roof, you can have sniper isolated to where we know that there are potential issues as far as moisture damage and stuff like that. So, how does somebody get involved with us if you're in that kind of realm where you're dealing with properties, with roofs, with repairing, replacing, inspecting, just in general taking care of the roof for commercial and large buildings? Definitely give us a call. We're online. We have our website, and you reach out to us. We do a very thorough analysis. Like basically, we're going to ask you what the problem is and how we can best solve those problems and build a flight parameter to your needs and build that program for you as far as annual or biannual inspections to what you're looking to do, and have that on a platform that we can help on the asset management so that we can take that burden off of your shoulders instead of adding more to your shoulders, and say, okay, here are all of the properties mapped out across the country, and here are storms, and here are annual re-inspections, and here's the health status going from green to red to, oh my God, we need to fix this now,
yeah.
prioritization. That's something that we can definitely help add a ton of value to your nationwide or very large regional market as far
Yeah.
as roofing, inspection, property, and asset management.
And we're definitely really good at what we do. Obviously, I'm a drone instructor at a major tech institute. Chris, he comes from solar background. He's been doing that forever, a lot of thermal imaging and things of that capacity. Another one of our partners is a master Hague certified roof inspector. So like, yeah, we definitely have the experience. So it's not like just getting a few drone guys go out there and do it. Like we actually know what we're talking about. We have the team to support you. I think this is something that's heavily underutilized in this industry, and I'm really excited to hopefully bring about some change. A lot of companies know this is what they should be doing, but they haven't done it, and I don't entirely understand why. But we definitely have something that does provide a lot of value, and we're excited to get started.
I think a lot of companies may not know about it yet and or are just becoming aware of it. So it is the new thing that is the unknown and may not have the full understanding of the value versus the cost.
Yeah,
Most of what we are focused on is providing a lot more efficiency, a lot more accuracy, and a lot more actionable reports and data so that you can do more with less.
yeah,
We even though a thermal roofing inspection may cost more than a visual or boots on roof kind of roofing inspection, this is going to give you more data, more value, and overall the return on investment is going to be 10x fold.
it's not apples to apples, and that's one of the conversations we have a lot as well. It's like it's not the same. This is not the same as traditional inspection. This is a whole nother supplement to really get you above and beyond. And just think of the wow factor if you can provide a 3D model thermal imaging to a property owner, like, and then you have another roofing company that shows up there with a few iPhone photos. Like, who do you think they're going to go with? Like, come on,
Right.
really?
And
It's
for those roofing companies that have their own boots on roof inspectors, this isn't to say that they're not good. It's basically giving you those boots on roof inspectors a
Yep.
guide map, a cheat sheet of those roofs and where to look specifically and which roofs are the most important to look at, instead of saying, hey, I need to look at 10 of these properties for this client that we have. Okay, well, we do 10 of those properties with a visual and a thermal inspection, and we find that 2 of those properties are really messed up, and then 8 of those properties are not. Well, now you know which ones to focus on, and the other ones you can go back and verify, double check what we're doing. We really, really are big about accuracy and verification. So it's always about, hey, we may not be the most qualified for the boots on roof core sample testing, but we are going to work with you to provide you the accurate data that we know is the expertise, and then provide you the actionable recommendation to verify our results.
Yeah, no, makes total sense. Well, hey, dude, like always, man, it's always a pleasure having you on. I know we're going to be talking a lot more thermal, so this is the first
Definitely.
video of many more that are coming, so I'm really excited to
It's
dive
heating
in.
up.
It is it's heating up. I like that. That is a great little way. So, yeah, all right, guys. Well, thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.